Okay, so we're going to go through 3 steps today on how you can become a much more effective coach or help people with coaching skills. Now, I used to run a lot of mastermind groups for many, many years in my local community for hundreds of people to take part in over that time. People that were just starting out in business or people that were, widely successful and have, 100K plus businesses annually. And, the idea of a mastermind is that they came together to get help. A mastermind principle was created by Napoleon Hill, or first cited by Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, a really good, timeless book, over 100 years old now, but very, very good. And, the idea of coming together as a group. And in that group, one person particularly needs a bit of help, and they will be asked questions, offered advice, and the group will come together and formulate this creative space where one person's question may inspire somebody else to think about something, asking something else, which could then inspire the third person to create a piece of advice that has come from the group and not one individual person could have gotten there. It's a really, really powerful concept. It's a really good way to share ideas, have accountability, and think more creatively about the work that you do. So I ran these mastermind groups for a long time, and that was the start for me of a lot of my coaching journey because I got around people on a regular basis. I was hosting these events, meeting interesting people. But one of the main things I was learning is how to communicate more effectively. And I'm a bit of an observer, an introvert, so I often watch people and what they're doing. And one of the big things I noticed from the group, where there were a couple of people in the group that really stood out as like rock star communicators. Everybody else respected their opinion. They wouldn't always speak the most, but when they spoke, people listened, and the support was awesome. And it was often a key takeaway, sometimes completely out of left field that nobody's expecting, but it always hit home and was always effective. And then there were a bunch of people in the group that didn't have the same effect. They wanted to help and support, but it didn't really have the same gravitas or actual deep learning that was in there. And over the time, I really paid attention to these people in hopes to learn from them. And one of the big elements was firstly, they listened intently. They listened intently. And I would notice them just really paying attention. And you can tell they were listening because they'd often use a lot of language that had already been spoken about. They would say, "Hey, Sarah, you just spoke about being in the business for 6 months, trying to help people with your coaching, and noticing that your content in social media wasn't up to scratch. And what I realized when you were talking about that was dot, dot, dot." So as they're speaking, they're citing what the other person was talking about. So that made them firstly build rapport. So they were actually paying attention, not just offhandedly offering comments and thoughts. And it seemed really effective because the advice they gave or the questions they gave was better received because they were listening. You know? And it ensured that they weren't necessarily leading people down a different path that was of their own making because of that similar language. Number two is they were patient. They took their time when communicating. And it'd often be the case that I'd forget that they were incorporated in the session because everyone else would be in this rapture of talking quite quickly, bouncing ideas off each other. And then you'd have this one person at the end, almost like a Godfather style character, leaning back and being really quiet in the shadows. Then they'd lean in, there'd be a hush going over the table, and they'd just say a few things, but it would be the culmination of all the knowledge that had been spoken about so far, delivered in a really poignant way. And that was often the information that was most needed. And I often reflect back to Nelson Mandela in this point. He was very much known to be the last person to speak. His father was a great tribal leader, and being the son of the tribal chief, he was always realizing that his father spoke last. So he took on that emphasis for himself, and it became a really good way for him to listen without feeling rushed. And then the advice that you're giving, you're essentially using a lot of that knowledge, a lot of those challenges, the trial and error that other people have fallen into to then create something a bit more astute in terms of your support and help for that person. Some of the other group, for example, didn't do that. They were blustering in, offering advice and questions that often weren't relevant for the person, but they thought they were trying to help. So they jumped in with something that they thought could really be of value. And often it was okay, and sometimes it was great, but a lot of the time they could have served themselves better by being more patient. And the third and final thing was they asked more questions than they did provide answers. Yeah. And that's quite counterintuitive if you think about it. Like you're helping and supporting people, but they would really try and help that person to find the answer for themselves. And there was often this big light bulb moment when the person realized, and often now I'd be in that situation of realizing this change. When I was asked a really powerful question from one of these people, it really got me thinking. And that thought process led me to some profound changes in my life. Whereas a lot of other people in the group were saying, hey, have you tried this? What about doing that? And I was like, well, I've tried that, or that's not relevant. It didn't have the same feeling. But when I was asked a question and forced to think, and sometimes came across a lot of hard truths, I decided to take more ownership about that. They asked me, well, what are you going to do now about that situation? Rather than telling me what I should do. And I'm a stickler for authority anyway. So the classic entrepreneur and self-employed person in me would sometimes rebel against being told what to do. So having the ownership of the idea really helped me and it often helped a ton of other people to do that. But if you think about it, that takes away a lot of the pressure from the person in that situation of trying to help, from having all of the answers. They didn't mind not having the answer if they could help you by asking a great question to draw the answer out for you. And this is a big staple for coaching as well. That can be tempting to offer advice that can support people. And yeah, sometimes it can be of value if it's worked for you, but different people's personalities play a factor, different experiences play a factor. It's not always a one size fits all fits. So typically try to follow those three rules and you'll be a much more effective coach and leader when you're communicating with people. Listening intently, being patient, and asking more questions than you do provide answers. And you'll be well on your way to being a powerful leader. Okay, good luck.